But again, Kum Len and Ablat Gemara, Mitzvah Shabbos Parshas Porah. Today's daf is daf Mem Zayin. We'll begin from above the base, the very bottom of the page of the Gemara. This is referring back to the Mishnah where it says that what happens. Now we're saying we had two opinions. Rabbi Lezer said that you have to do all your activities before you can go ahead and start drinking wine. You have to bring the 3 kabbanas, the haircut, and all that. And the Chachamim said no. You can as soon as you did one of the activities, one of the kabbanas, you can already do everything you want. So what happened here was you shaved your head. You did one carbon, and you shaved your head, and it turned out to be that this one carbon was was disqualified, either because you had the wrong thoughts in mind or you took it out of the base of the Mishnah, whatever it is. But the Mishnah gives an example: you had the wrong thoughts in mind, and what you did was you brought a carbon chatus and then you shaved your head. A carbon chatus, if you didn't have the right things in mind, is disqualified. It's not a valid carbon. And then you brought the other 2 carbonas, the remaining ones, properly. The problem was, since the first carbon you did was disqualified, it comes out you took your haircut before you brought any of the carbonas. And that's not acceptable. The question is after 1 carbon or after 3, but definitely not prior to the carbonas. So basically, you have to do your whole Naziris again, 30 days Naziris again. And but what happens if you that was the chatus. When you bring a shlomim or an oile, there's an exception that if you had the wrong thought in mind, it's a valid carbon, but you did not discharge your responsibility. So the fact of the matter is, you did not discharge your responsibility. So if you took a haircut, and it turned out to be that shlomim or oila, you did it wrong, you had the wrong thing in mind, even though it's a valid carbon, since you did not discharge your responsibility, it's tantamount to taking a haircut before you brought any carbonas, so you got to start all over again. However, Rab Shimon says that when it comes to a shlomim, even though you had the wrong thought in mind, and even though you have not discharged your responsibility, when it comes to a shlomim, it's a valid carbon, you took a haircut after that, you don't have to do it again. And you just bring the rest of the kabbalah. So we want to know what the basis of Rab Shimon is. Says the Gemara, what we do glean from Rab Shimon is that a shlomim is an exception, that even though you have not discharged your responsibility, but if you brought a valid shlomim, even a donation, a voluntary basis, you brought a valid shlomim, and then you took a haircut, it's good enough. From the wording, the text of the pasuk, which pasuk are we referring to? So Shimon holds, if a nazir took a haircut on the nadava, on let's say a shlamim, yotza, you are yotza. My time of why? Because the Amakra, it says a pasuk, the nasan al ha'esh ashetachas zevach hashlamim. Where do you place it here? On the fire beneath the sacrifice called shlamim. It doesn't say your shlamim, it says a shlamim. The cost of our shlam of your shlamim, that means even a shlamim, if you brought a valid shlamim, it is good enough. Okay, we are up to now Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph at the very top of the page, concluding this perek here of Shloshim Minin, and we're still talking about the process of taking a haircut and so on. Says the Mishnah, Mi shenizrik olav echem and adam. You brought one of the kabbanas. Now remember, we had an argument before. If you take your haircut after all the kabbanas, or only 1 carbon, so then they spray the blood on you after 1 carbon, and then v'nitma, you became tameh. As a result of you becoming tameh, you cannot proceed to bring the other kabbanas, nor can you take a haircut. You didn't take a haircut yet. So according to Rabbi Lezer, all 3 carbonas that you bring are considered like one long carbon, because you cannot drink wine or anything else until you bring all your carbonas. So it's, since you became tameh in the middle of bringing your carbonas, so it's tantamount that you haven't brought any carbonas, because you can't bring the rest, and therefore you have to go through it again. What do you have to actually do again? You have to bring all your carbonas again. Because remember, according to Rabbi Lezer, if you break your Naziris at the very end of Naziris, it only breaks 7 days, no more than that. So you wait the 7 days to become pure, and you repeat all carbonas. The Rabbanan said, even after 1 carbon, you already completed your Naziris. In fact, you're even allowed to drink wine. So if you brought you 1 carbon, you didn't have a chance to take a haircut yet, and then you became tameh, the carbon you did was fine. You wait your 7 days, and then you bring your 2 other carbonas. Says the Mishnah, you sprinkle the blood, v'nitma, and then the person became tameh. Rabbi Lezer says, so he said, that's it, you got to bring all the carbonas again. You wait your 7 days, you bring all the carbonas again. And the Chachamim say, Yavi Shar Kabbanos, the carbon you brought is valid. You just now owe the two other kabbanos, but you can't bring it straight away. The Yitaya, first you become pure, you get sprinkled the paraduma, the red heifer, and then afterwards you bring the rest of the kabbanos. Amrullah, the rabbi said to support their cause. Ma'aseh b'Miriam haTarmudi. There was a story from Miriam from the city of Tarmudi, but the truth matters, we had in Mara Shabbos by Chanukah, where it says over there that you can light the Chanukah candles until until the footsteps of this people Tamadoy are no longer in the streets, because they're the ones that sold firewood. And Rashi says Tamadoy is the name of a nation, not a name of a region, but a name of a nation. So the others who says over here Miriam from not Tamadoy but Tardumoi, which is the name of a place. They sprayed on the blood. Uvo, they went, and they told her, so she meanwhile did one, she was a Nazir, she did one carbon, and before she had a chance to bring the other kabbalah, they told her that her daughter life was in danger. But she went, and she found Shemesa, that her daughter actually died and she became Tameh. The Chacham then said to her, Tavi Shar Kabbalah to become tar and then bring the balance of your kabbalah. So clearly, we're right that you don't have to restock the whole thing. You just bring the balance. Once you did one carbon, you're already sort of finished your Naziris, and then you just owe the two others. Says the Gemara, Tony Rabbi Lezer, says, it sounds like from the Mishnah, Gemara first thought was on apprehension. The Rabbi Lezer saying that what you have to start your whole Naziris again, and we questioned that because we learned previously, V'amar, on a number of occasions, Rabbi Lezer says, "Kol acham malayis." If you completed your whole term and then something went wrong, Shiva says it. All you have to do is wait 7 days till you become tired, and that's it. And your hair grew long enough already. The tip of it goes back to your roots. It's all good. Not you start your entire Naziris again. Amar Rav said you misunderstood the Mishnah. My soisa nami de kamar Rabbi Lezer. When the Mishnah says soisa, it doesn't mean you start all over again. It means soisa kabbanos. He has to bring the kabbanos all over again. That's it. And because since he holds that all three kabbanos are like one long carbon, and you became tameh after the first carbon, so therefore you cannot bring the other two. So if so you can't take a haircut or anything else, because if you take haircut before you brought your kabbanos, and you have to start it all over again. It makes sense. What do you start all over again? Bring your kabbanos again, and it makes sense. Look at the Mishnah wording. The Tanya Chachamim say. They argue and they say, Tovi Shar Kabbanis Vetita. The Chachamim say, bring the rest of the Kabbanis, and that's it. No, we're not discussing whether you have to repeat the Naziris here. I'm talking about the Kabbanis. That's a good proof. And furthermore, the story that they bring to corroborate their opinion. The story about Miriam. She brought one of the Kabbanis. They notified her about her daughter, that she was in danger. She found Shemesa, that her daughter died. All she has to do is bring the rest of the Kabbanis, and she's all right. Shma'ana, what does that prove? They're only arguing regarding the Kabbanis. Nobody's saying that you have to become a Nazir again. It says the Gemara.
The end of the parak.
Yep. Hadin Allah Shleishim. Hadin Allah Shleisha Minin. Now, just a quick introduction for the next parak. So we say a Nazir is not permitted to become Tameh during the Naziris. If he becomes Tameh, he basically upsets his entire Naziris, and he has to start all over again. So he waits for 7 days, and then it doesn't matter how many days he counts, he has to start all over again. That's if he becomes Tameh. And so during his Naziris, he's not permitted to become Tameh to anyone, even to his immediate relatives. He's not allowed to become Tameh to anyone. That's the Nazir. The only exception is, and that's what we're going to talk about, is Meis Mitzvah. A Meis Mitzvah, he's allowed to mimatam himself. That's the story of a Nazir. Then you have an ordinary coin, a common coin. The common coin known as a coin hedget. They cannot mitam themselves either. But what they could do, they couldn't go, not only they could, but there's a mitzvah to go to their 7 relatives. Father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, and sister only if she's not married, and wife. 7 relatives, and that's it. And of course, he can become tameh to a meis mitzvah. And then you have the kohen gadol. Kohen gadol, just like a nazir, cannot be tameh to anybody except a meis mitzvah. So kohen gadol and nazir are the same dinim. And when we say that they all have an avera to become tameh, we're talking about tameh to a corpse. but not other kinds of tumah. Other kinds of tumah, there's no avera for a kohen or kohen gadol or a nazir to become tummy, like touching a leper or touching somebody, a male who has emissions of zav, or touching a female. Neither those tumah, even though they become tummy, there's no prohibition there. Okay, so let's do them now. The Mishnah is going to talk about a very interesting concept. If there's a meis mitzvah lying there and you have to, one of them have to become tamei, which is the lesser kedusha, so therefore they can be metamei themselves. That's the general question here. Says the Mishnah, kohen gadol and nazir, you have a kohen gadol and a nazir, ein metamei l'krevein. Both of them are not allowed to become tamei to their relatives. Avo mitamin lemeis mitzvah. But the exception is for a meis mitzvah. Now, but that if they were traveling in the road, they encountered a mes mitzvah. The question is, who should be the one to make himself tummy? Who has the lesser kedusha, the kohen gadol or the nazir? Practically speaking, I don't understand the case, because a kohen gadol is not allowed to leave Yerushalayim. And so therefore, in Yerushalayim, how do you have the concept of a meis mitzvah? In fact, the Gemara says a meis mitzvah is out in the wilderness, in the middle of a city, especially a city like Yerushalayim. How in the world do you have a concept of a meis mitzvah where there's nobody around, that you ask for people to come, nobody's going to come to help out? It's very difficult to understand. And the Mishnah is actually telling you halacha, because we'll see the Gemara later on. The Rishonim, we try to work out each scenario, how it works. And not sure how this one here will work. Nobody talks about it. So obviously it works very simply, but I just don't know how. Anyway, Rabbi Lezer's opinion, Yitma Kohen Gadol v'al Yitma Nazir. He believes that a Nazir is a higher level of Kedusha than a Kohen Gadol, and he'll prove it in a minute. And the Chachamim disagree. They say no, Yitma Nazir v'al Yitma Kohen Gadol. The Chachamim say no, that the Nazir, it should the one become Tameh, because a Kohen Gadol is a higher level of Kedusha. Rabbi Lezer said, I'll explain to you. Yitma Kohen she'ein becomes a Masif. If a Kohen becomes Tameh, or committed a sin, after he becomes purified, goes back to normal. But he doesn't have to bring any specific karbanis. But Yitma Nazir, if he becomes Tameh, what happens? Shu maybe korban al tamas. He brings 3 karbanis. He brings a chatas, an oil, and an asham. So therefore, the kedusha of a nazir does not prove the kedusha of a nazir is greater than the kedusha of a kohen gadol. So if someone has to become tamei, let the kohen gadol become tamei. Pretty extraordinary thing. The nazir should be even holier than a kohen gadol. Amrullah, they disagree. They said yitma nazir. You know why a nazir is lesser kedusha than a kohen gadol? She'ein kedushasei kedusha's olam. His kedusha does not last forever. Now, exactly what does that mean? There's a number of ways of understanding. Number one is he wasn't born into it. A kohen is born into it, number one. But the truth of the matter, the kohen gadol was not born into either. He wasn't a kohen gadol his whole life. He became a kohen gadol. So someone trying to learn that is a bit difficult to understand how, because that really, they're both the same. This person became a kohen gadol some later stage in life, and so did the nazir. So the kedusha doesn't mean that nazir generally is only 30 days, and the kohen is a kohen for life. Another explanation is that a nazir can always unravel, can always be matan neder, go to 3 rabbis and go to a court and say, I want to be matan my neder. But a kohen cannot opt out. Once you're a kohen forever. Or a nazir, the kedusha came from the person, but a kohen, the kedusha came from Hashem. So therefore, by a nazir is holier. The kedusha of a kohen is holier than a nazir, because a nazir is just self-made. Ba'al yitam koyin, and a koyin should not be metam. Kedusha should be forever. Somebody asked a question today in the earlier share. The Rambam says, he was with Rambam, but the Rambam says that a koyin, that a nazir, if the nazir goes ahead and becomes tameh, he committed 4 sins. So why doesn't the Gemara say that a nazir should be stricter than a kohen gadol? A kohen gadol commits 1 sin if the kohen gadol is metame themselves, but a nazir is metame, it's 4 sins. So of course the kohen gadol should be the one to metame to the mes mitzvah rather than the nazir. That was a question. It's a very good question. So the truth of the matter is, I told them this. There's a famous argument between the Ravid and Rama Rutenberg. If somebody is ill on Shabbos, and the doctors prescribe to eat meat, and they have 2 alternatives now. One is to shech an animal on Shabbos, chil Shabbos, skila, to save the person's life. And the other one, there's treif there lying right there, You don't have to shecht any animal, just to eat treif. So what should you do? Should you give the person treif or should you shecht the animal? Because the Gemara in Yuma says, ma'achilin kal. You always try to give the lesser iser. So one opinion is obviously giving the treif. Treif is only an avera, lav, and shechting is skila. However, the Ravid says no, the other way around. He says like this. He says when you shecht, true, it's a very severe avera, but you do it only once. You shecht, it's over. Eating treif, every kazayas, every every mouthful that you eat, you're committing another avera. In other words, according to the Ravid, the aggregate of averas is more severe than even one very strict avera. So the Shar HaMelech asks from this very Mishnah that very question. It was Simon's question. The Shar HaMelech asks from this Mishnah on the opinion of the Ravid that he learns if you commit a number of aver lavit, it becomes stricter than a serious aver, even though it's a skila. So how are you going to learn pshat in the Mishnah here? How can you say that a Nazir is less kedusha than a kohen gadol? What are you talking about? It's 4 averis. Anyways, this is the question. This is what he wants to use to repudiate the Ravid. So I said, could be to defend the Ravid, it could be there's a fundamental difference. There's a difference if you do one pool, one ma'aseh, one act that has within it 4 sins, or if you continuously do the act again and again and again. The Ravid says if you did one aver that has 4 sins, doesn't make it stricter than another severe aver that has only 1. But the problem with eating treif is he's doing avera again. He's doing a number of averas. He's eating every time he eats. He's doing a new avera. So doing a number of averas separately, the aggregate of that overrides a severe avera of shechting, let's say, in Shabbos. So this Mishnah here, the reason why we don't count the Nazir, because it's only one act, going and making himself tummy. So even though there are 4 lavin there, the kohen gadol's kedusha is stronger than the 4 lavin of one act of a Nazir. And that's why we say that the Nazir should become tamei, not the kohen gadol. Anyway, says the Gemara. I understand the discussion between a kohen gadol and Nazir. High sover kohen gadol. The Mishnah explains this one thought that the kedusha of a kohen gadol is stronger, and therefore he should not be metamei. And the high sover Nazir and Rabbi Elazar holds that no, the kedusha of a Nazir is greater. But my question is as follows: on Mashuach, what happened was that Moshe Rabbeinu had this oil, Sansenes Hamon, and he had this oil, which was made up of 12 loigin of oil, in a certain measure, 12 loigin, and miraculously, and he placed that in the Kodesh Kedoshim, and that oil was used to anoint all the vessels in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, and all the Kohanim Gedolim used that oil until King Yoshio, towards the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. And any king, if their sons were fighting, then you have to anoint Malkei David. They were anointed with this oil, and miraculously, it still retained the full 12 loigin. Now that oil, any kohen gadol who was appointed and as a kohen gadol and anointed with that oil is called a meshuach. This is a kohen gadol meshuach. Then Yoshio realized what was happening, and Yoshio realized what was happening. So he decided to conceal the Aron. He concealed everything that was in Kodesh Kedoshim. He concealed till Mashiach comes, and that light disappeared. So any kohen gadol after that point and moment in history, how did they become a kohen gadol? They wear 8 vestments instead of 4. So they were called a merubah begadim. Now, is there a difference between a kohen gadol anointed or kohen gadol merubah begadim? The difference is only if they committed an avera by mistake. A kohen gadol, if there was a meshuach, committed an avera by mistake, they have to bring a bull, a par, which is the same identical carbon. If Klal Yisrael makes a mistake, they bring a par. So too, if this kohen gadol makes a mistake, he brings a par. He represents the entire Klal Yisrael, even though he did it as an individual. But once you're merubah begadim, you're a notch lower. And by merubah begadim, if he committed a sin by mistake, he brings the same carbon that anybody else does, a sheep or a goat. So that's the only difference. So now the question is, these two, you have a scenario where you have a kohen gadol who is a meshuach and a kohen gadol merubah begadim, and which one should be metame? And it's obvious that a kohen merubah begadim is one notch lower than a kohen Mashiach. Now the Mefarshim, the Rishonim have a problem. How in the world can you have 2 kohenim gedolim? One is a meshuach and one is a begadim. What do you call it? Merubah begadim. So the Rishonim here make a big chiddush. We learned in Yom Yuma that on Yom Kippur they would appoint a deputy, and if the kohen gadol, let's say, became tamei, this deputy would step in. And then after Yom Kippur, the kohen gadol was reinstated. Once he was no longer, and so the kohen who stepped in, this Gan, the assistant, he now is called a Meshuach Sha'ava. He's a has-been. He's now a rabbi emeritus. And in fact, he can no longer function. He cannot act like Kohen Gadol because it'll create rivalry with existing Kohen Gadol. But nor can he resume his role as a Kohen Hedyot because Ma'ilin b'Kodesh v'Eimeridin. So Rabbi Yeshi says he's in a state of limbo. Interesting whether people thought, what's more, if you had a choice to be on top of your game for 5 minutes, for the rest of your life, you're in limbo, you can't do anything, or you'd rather just be the average person, but you can be productive the rest of your life. So it's interesting. This Gan knew that if he steps up to the plate, if he steps up as a Gan, he'll never function again. So the Russian Taisus make a chiddush, and they say that if that's mainly the Rush, that if the Kohen Gadol had to step aside on Yom Kippur, not because of Tameh, because he fell ill, or during the year he fell ill. And we don't know how long it'll take for him to become cured. Says the Rosh and the Taisus, if it's for a long time, they don't say how long, but if it's for a while, so you have to have a replacement. Once that replacement has been there for a while, even when the Kohen Gadol, the first one, comes back and he's cured, we don't give him his job back. It's good. And this is very important halacha. If a chazan, for example, loses his voice, and they put in another chazan taking the place. Or if a rav became sick, so they got the assistant rabbi now stepped up, became the rabbi. And for a while, don't know what a while is, but let's say for a year, and then the rav is cured, the chazan got his voice back. Can they say, I want my job back? Big shaila and halacha. And here, based on this thing over here, we can see that the Russian Taisus say that once the Kohen Gadol, if it's for a while, the question is what a while is, he loses it, somebody else stepped in, they take over. So you can have a Meshuach and a Merubah Begadim, because it happened right when Yoshio concealed the thing, and the Begadim, Merubah Begadim took over, so he's only wearing 8 vestments. And then a year later, the other Kohen Gadol is cured. So they have 2 Kohen Gadolim. Which one should be the one in charge? So which one should be giving up? So even though the Merubah Begadim is the one who's functional, he's the acting Kohen Gadol, he's still a notch lower than the Meshuach. Says the Gemara. So you have these 2 people. Umerubah Begadim and Zayin on base on top. Meshuach b'shemen hamishcha adi, the one who is the oil, anointed with the oil, has more kedusha. How do I know? Somebody is anointed with oil, maybe par habar kol mitzvahs. If he committed a sin by mistake, he brings the usual par. Ilu, however, merubah begadim, a maybe meshuach, a maybe, but a merubah begadim brings an ordinary carbon like everybody else. But my question is, a meshuach she'avar merubah begadim. The meshuach she'avar, that's a deputy that stepped up to the plate and he took over, let's say, on Yom Kippur. And you have a Merubah Begadim, the Kohen Gadol who's wearing the 8 vestments. Which one now has to step up? Which one now is a lesser kedusha? Before we go on, how is it possible that a Meshuach she'avar? So the Kohen, the past Kohen and Merubah Begadim. So the Merubah Begadim had to be appointed afterwards to become the Kohen Gadol. So what happened to the previous Kohen Gadol? He must have died. So why didn't the Meshuach she'avar become the new Kohen Gadol? He didn't become the new Kohen Gadol is because, according to the Rush, people were corrupt. If you remember Yuma, there were a lot of Kohen Gadol were corrupt. They used to bribe the king and the government to give him a job. So maybe that's what happened over here. The Merubah Begadim bribed the government and he took over the job. Or people realized that Merubah Begadim is more qualified than that Kohen she'avar. Taisus doesn't like that. Taisus says it's talking about with the original Kohen Gadol. He didn't die. They kidnapped him and they took him to like Golos Yechoni. They took him to Babel, and when they once he was taken away, the Kohen Meshuach that replaced him for Yom Kippur, let's say, cannot step up to the plate because the rivalry will be terrible. If that Kohen God was languishing somewhere in Babel, and he knows that his deputy now took over the position, it's bad enough that he's in Golos. It's going to hurt him emotionally, and therefore they got someone as Merubah Begadim. So between these 2, who's more chashiv? Then Merubah Begadim Adid. Merubah Begadim Adid. He's functional right now. The fact is he's the one who's the Kohen Gadol. He's practicing. Bila Meshuach Rabba, if you remember, doesn't do anything. He's in a state of limbo. Can't act as a Kohen Gadol, nor because of the rivalry, nor can he act as a Kohen Hedyot. Okay, what about Ava Machmas Kuruya v'Acha Machmas? You have 2 Kohen Gadolim. Both of them had to step aside. One stepped aside because it became tummy. And then they replace somebody else. And that one stepped aside because of a mum. is over machmas kurei odiv. Sorry, mumi over. Was that? Well, just
Over mamas mume,
Yes,
over
I-
machmas kirui odiv.
yeah. Well, sorry, I lost the place here. Over machmas kurei odiv. The person that was stepped aside because they became tamei has more kedusha. Why? Because there's a time limit. We know that this lasts either for 1 day, or if it's more serious than that, so 2 or 3 times, then it lasts for 7 days. But that's it. But the one who, let's say, has a defect, a mum, how do you know how long it'll take before he recovers, fully recovers? This person can become a kohen gadol tomorrow and be active. Who knows when he'll come active? Now we have another kind of a kohen gadol. It's called a meshuach mulchama. A meshuach mulchama is somebody also is anointed. In fact, he has all the laws of a kohen gadol, can become tummy anywhere, wears 8 clothing. But what's his role? His role is when there's a war, he has to be out there on the front, and he has to inspire, motivate the soldiers to go out and attack the enemy. That's his role. That's his job. So what happens? You have a meshuach mulchama, and you have a sgan, the deputy. Hai menayu, between the two of them, Adif, who has more kedusha? And the question is very interesting. The meshuach mulchama's role is definitely a lot lower than the sgan, who might act as a kohen gadol, because the kohen gadol is serving in the base of Mikdash itself. But the question is, what's more chashiv, a bird in your hand or 2 in the bush? So this meshuach mulchama is doing exactly what his role is, 100%. This gan, don't even know whether he'll ever step up to the plate. The kohen gadol doesn't get sick, or the kohen gadol doesn't have a tumor, and his gan does nothing. So, but if he does step up to the plate, he will be the acting kohen gadol. He'll be the one entering the kodesh hakadoshim. So he'll be in a very, be catapulted in a very chashuv position. So right now, when this gan does not yet have that position, but he has a potential. So a potential for a greater thing versus an active lower kedusha, which at the end of the day, which has more kedusha. So, Meshuach Mulchama is gan Haimanai Odiv, which has more kedusha? Do we say Meshuach Mulchama Odiv? He has more kedusha, the Chazil Mulchama, because he's doing exactly what his job is, which is to be out there and to help out the people at the front. Idil Gan Odiv, the Chazil Avodah, or maybe this gan is better because there's a potential he'll be serving in the Beis Hamikdash. Tashma coming here, there's a clear brisa. It says the Tanya we learned, Ein Bein Meshuach Mulchama L'Sgan. There's no difference between Mulchama and Sgan. Ella, but she'im hoya mahalchim baderech. Even they were traveling on the road, and they found a corpse. Yitma Meshuach Mulchama says clearly here that the Meshuach Mulchama is a lesser degree of kedusha, and he should be the one to be metamet to the meis mitzvah. But al Yitma has gone, and the gan shouldn't. Clear. Says the Gemara, but if that's so clear to you, I have another brayso that seems to contradict that. But Tanya, in Gemara Harius, we learned, let's say a building collapses, and inside that building you had 2 people, there's gan, and you had the Meshuach Mulchama, and you can only rescue one. Which one should you rescue? There's gan, the one with the unbelievable potential, or the Meshuach Mulchama? And the law says you got to rescue the Meshuach Mulchama. Doesn't that tell you Meshuach Mulchama is actually more significant, has more kedusha than this gan? Contradicts the previous brisa. So we're asking, what Tanya we learn, Meshuach Mulchama kain was gan. That Meshuach Mulchama you have to rescue first. Alma Mazuza says you're conflating the issues here. Over there is when you have to rescue one person, who does Klal Yisrael need more? We need the Meshuach Mulchama more to get out there and motivate the soldiers to go and to defend us. So therefore, to defend that Yisrael. So therefore, we tell them the Meshuach Mulchama, we have to rescue Meshuach Mulchama. But when it comes to the laws of Tumah, and we're degrading this person, who has more kedusha that is losing more? Obviously, this gan, we're saying is a high level of kedusha. The very fact that he has potential to go to kedusha means that he already has, in a sense, that kedusha. So Gemara says, when it comes to rescuing somebody, Meshuach Mulchama, and of course Meshuach Mulchama is better. Why? My time at the Tolabei Rabbi. The public are relying on this Meshuach Mulchama to motivate the soldiers. When it comes to matters of Tumah, who is greater breach, Skan Odif. The Skan has more kedusha, and therefore he should not be the one to metame. How do I know that? Why does a kohen gadol need a deputy? What's his role? By psul, if something happens to the kohen gadol, he steps in and takes over the role, assumes the role of the kohen gadol. What does that say to us? That this person, the fact that he has a capacity to become the kohen gadol means he already has that kedusha. Otherwise, how can he step up as a kohen gadol? So then Gemara continues. Okay,
doesn't the kedusha actually come about when he actually takes on the role?
The role is gone. That's what we're saying. The fact that we appointed him to be this gan and be ready and waiting means that he already has the kedusha. Not that the kedusha comes afterwards. Sorry.
He has the kedusha of a sagan, not of a kohen gadol.
But we're saying that the kedusha is gan because he has a potential so he's a notch lower than a kohen gadol, but way higher than Mashur Muhammad because he has a connection already to the kodesh kedusha.
Okay.
So now the Gemara says, okay, so we finished this discussion. At kind of like pligi, elabit, kohen gadol, and the argument we have between Lezacham is only they're both walking together. Who should be the one to be metam themselves? So at kind of like pligi, elabit, kohen gadol, and kohen gadol, kikar ozli bahadi adodi. They're walking together. The question is, but there's no argument that each one individually, even though they're not allowed to be metam themselves, have a mitzvah to occupy themselves with a mace mitzvah. The question is, how do you know that? How do you know that a kohen gadol is permitted to be metamed to a corpse, to a mace mitzvah? And how do you know that a nazir can? What does it say in the Torah anyway that they can? So the Gemara for the today and tomorrow is going to discuss, and the day after is going to discuss the psukim. So the wording of the pasuk is as follows: when it comes to a kohen gadol, the pasuk says, "I'm just quoting by heart, Al kol nafshos mace." We're talking on any person that passed away. It says that lo yavai, you shouldn't come in, you shouldn't walk into that room. And then it says, don't be matame yourself to your father or mother, which seems superfluous. If you're not allowed to be matame to anybody, now you can say very simply, you cannot be matame to anybody talking about strangers, and talking about even your own relatives. You know a kohen head you can, but not you a kohen gadol. So then, first of all, what do you need the email for? Why don't you tell me if you can't, that I know. You can't matame to relatives. Plus, we're going to learn that according to this view in the Gemara here today, our kol nafshos mace, it's obvious that it can't be talking about strangers. Why can't it be talking about strangers? Because an ordinary kohen who could be matame to his parents and his relatives is not permitted to be matame to strangers. So you would think a kohen gadol can. I need a pasuk to tell me a kohen gadol shouldn't be metame to strangers. Of course not. Kohen head you can, surely kohen gadol can. So why does the Torah say kol nafshos meis lo yaveh? Actually, kol nafshos meis is talking about your relatives. That those relatives that a kohen head can go to, you shouldn't. So then the words la'avi v'leima is totally superfluous. What for? I already know from the words I'll call nafshos meis lo yaveh that don't contaminate itself to relative, and that's what we're going to use here. We're going to use la'aviv to teach you about a meis mitzvah, not to your father, but to meis mitzvah. Yeah, and then we use leimai for Gzeira Shava, to teach us another law, which is as follows. Says the Gemara. Quickly, says the Gemara, how do you know? Just what we learned. You should have nothing to do with any nefesh of a mace, any corpse. So many corpses, what are we talking about? Even the strangers, I need a pasuk for that. Isn't it Kavul Chaymer? Kohen Hedjit, Shumatam the Krib. Kohen Hedjit is permitted to go ahead and enter into the levaya of his relatives. Cannot go to the levaya of a stranger. A kohen gadol a kohen gadol cannot go to his relatives. Is that obvious he cannot go to strangers? What do you need to tell me for that? Because in other words, when the pasuk says "Al kol nafshis meis lo yavai," nafshis meis is referring to your immediate relatives. Those very same relatives that a kohen hedjit has a mitzvah to be metame, you, the kohen gadol, shouldn't go to. No, if so, what do you say? So we've learned. Don't be metame to your father. You can. Not you can, you should. So what does it say? Ima his mother. That's also superfluous. Like Zayda Shava, we needed to. The word ima is extra, and we're going to say that the word ima by a nazir is also extra because it's very similar to by a kohen gadol. In fact, by nazir it adds a few more. It says the same thing. I'll call nefesh mesel yava, but then there it says. There it says, and the Gemara is going to learn from each one of those words something. So by a kohen gadol, it just says father and mother, but by a nazir it says father, mother, brother, and sister. And we're going to learn a different halacha from every single word. So, so the top of the page of Chesom and Aleph says the Gemara. So kohen gadol says he shouldn't have anything to do with his relatives, but to his father he shouldn't as well because the meis mitzvah he can. And then it says le'imai. What's a le'imai? Well, le'imai is l'gzeida shava. Le'imai is extra to teach you the following rule. A nazir and a kohen gadol not allowed to become tummy. Any kind of tumah, or only limited to the tumah of a mace. You become tummy of a mace by touching it, lifting it, or oil if you're sharing the same roof. You're in the same room, or you're hovering over it, or the mace is hovering above you. So we're going to use the imay to tell you that it means only if a person died, you're not allowed to, the kohen gadol is not allowed to touch that body. But they're allowed to touch a leper, they're allowed to touch a zov, allowed to touch a nevela carcass. Now, how do we know that? From Nazir. Now, how do you know by Nazir that? So the Gemara explains. The Tanya Rebbe said, "We looked at the top of him." But Rebbe says, "Gabi Nazir." It says in the pasuk, which is, it says in the pasuk as follows. It says, "His father, his mother, his brother, his sister shouldn't go tamei b'maisam when they're dead. Obviously, when they're alive, you don't become tamei. So what do you mean? What did say b'maisam? That to tell you that the only tumah we are concerned about is a tumah that they pass on once they pass away. But while they're alive, if they pass on a tumah, don't worry about it. Even though the nazir becomes tamei, he doesn't lose the days of naziris. What kind of tumah are we trying to perform here? You're out of metamei if somebody becomes a leper. And Zivasim. Zivasim was just brought by the way. What's so chiddush about a leper? Because we learned in Gemara Darim now 4 people that are considered like dead, even though they're alive. Somebody's blind, and one of them was a leper. So we would have thought that legally, it's not just drush, we would have thought that legally a leper is the same status as a mace, and a nazir is not allowed to be, and a kohen gadol should not be metamei to a metzora. So it tells you b'maisam, the only one that you have to worry about is that they actually died, not somebody that legally is considered dead if they're not actually dead. So we're using imay by nazir to teach and imay by kohen gadol to learn from each other that a kohen gadol is permitted to metamei to a metzora. Mainly el ben nazir. So the pasuk written by a nazir. How do I know kohen gadol menayin? How do I know kohen gadol the same rule applies? Amrit, we say the following: Lo yomer imay be kohen gadol, because the word imay is extra. Why say imay by a kohen gadol? There's no reason for it. There's nothing to teach you. Of course, you cannot be metamei to your mother. And how is that? We'll go a step further. First of all, we already know if a kohen hedyot. We now be metamei to your mother. Why do I have to tell me you now be metamei to your mother? Because the Gemara tomorrow is going to tell us that or the day after, we would have thought, actually the day after, we would have thought that a mother, and tomorrow, to a mother you could be metamei, even though you cannot be metamei to your father. And why is that? Why we didn't? You could think so. Why is that? Because we're going to learn Gemara Chulun Daf Yud Aleph that a mother we know 100% is your mother because she carried you the full term and then she gave birth. So obviously we know the child is the mother. How do you know the father is the father? No one knows the father is the father. So we follow a legal rule called Roiv, or we follow the rule called Chazakah. Roiv bilas achar bal, or Chazakah that probably came from the husband. Even if the woman committed adultery, most of the times it would have been with the husband. So we follow the rules of Roiv. So we can maybe argue and say that a father, the kohen gadol, should not become tamei too, because you don't really know it's your father, so don't take any chances. But when it comes to the mother, it's 100% the mother. Maybe you're allowed to be tamei. So the Gemara says no. We don't need a mother is extra. Why is a mother extra? That you should not become tamei, because in the laws of tumah by kohen hedyot, the relationship of the mother is weaker than the relationship of the father. When we say a kohen hedyot can be metamei to his brother, it's only a paternal brother. But if it would be a maternal brother, no, they don't share a common father, then you're not allowed to be metamei. So we see from kohen hedyot, when it comes at least to the rules of tumah, the relationship of a mother is weaker than the relationship of a father. So if you tell me by a nazir that you cannot, or kohen gadol, you cannot be metamei to your father, then surely you cannot be metamei to your mother. Because we see by tumah, that's what Gemara is saying here. So why does the Torah say the word mother? When a kohen hedyot is permitted, has a mitzvah to metamei to his paternal brother, ain't kohen gadol metamei love. Kohen gadol cannot be metamei even to his father. So where a kohen hedyot cannot be metamei, for example, his maternal brother. Surely if the kohen gadol cannot be metamei to his father, which when it comes to tumah it's a much stronger relationship, surely he cannot be metamei to the mother. Could we see by kohen hedyot cannot be metamei to his maternal brother? Surely the kohen gadol cannot. So why does the Torah say imay by the kohen gadol? Since the Gemara spells everything out here, very interesting text. Mahadin, since the Kal V'Chaim already gave them, told us already that what? That the Kohen Gadol cannot go to the mother. Why in the world did the Torah have to then spell out the Kohen Gadol should not be metamei to his mother? Mufna. Mother is extra. Lahakish v'lodin heimenu gzer shava. It's there to teach us that we can make a gzer shava between the Kohen Gadol and the Nazir. The word mother is extra in both of them. And nemar ima ben Nazir. It says the word mother by Nazir, which is redundant. You don't need it. Nemar ima ben Kohen Gadol. I was just explained. You don't have to say to the Kohen Gadol, don't be metamet your mother. It's obvious once you know the father. But we're going to say it's a gzer shava. Ma ima ha'ama ben Nazir. Just like by a Nazir. B'moisam eina metame. Only after they die, you now be metame. But you could be metame if they're a nega after a leper or ziva. So av imay ha'amar b'kohen gadol. So too, mother. When it says mother b'kohen gadol, b'moisameina metame. Only after they died. Ava metame goes also be allowed to touch everything else. Okay, so